We also want to give a thanks to the survivors that are joining us this evening to have the courage to tell their story and take the time to share the information that we're going to talk about tonight. We also know that it's not just those of us that are part of this town hall tonight for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. We also know that there are many Pennsylvanians across the state that are very supportive of survivors also. We know through a public poll that was conducted last month that 82% of the voting public supports survivors of childhood abuse for having the ability to have a 2-year window, which is going to be a part of what we'll be talking about tonight. So thank you for being a part of that movement to support those survivors. We are planning on doing a second session following this one, and that second session will be focused as a survivor-led panel. And we are still in the process of scheduling that, so more information will become available at a later date. For those that have registered, we will have your contact information. We can follow up with you to let you know when that is scheduled. And if there's any information that we may need to follow up with anyone on, we'll also be able to use your contact information to give that with you so you have it. This is going to be recorded this evening so that anyone can access it at a later date. We are also staying true to our mission for language access, and we are going to have interpretation and closed captioning services available also. So I will pause here and let our translation services explain how that will work.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. This is Vanessa. I am one of the interpreters for Spanish, along with my colleague Ernest. So today's event is going to be conducted in English with live interpretation available into Spanish. To listen to the interpretation on a computer, locate the globe icon along the bottom row of your Zoom screen and select Spanish. If you're joining via the Zoom app on a mobile device, click More or the 3 dots on the bottom right corner of your screen, select language interpretation, then choose Spanish and then click done. If you would like to hear only the interpreters without the original speakers in the background, click mute original audio when selecting your language. And we ask that everyone, English speakers and even bilingual people, choose a language to ensure clear communication. You may change your listening language at any time throughout the program. Hola, buenas tardes. El evento de hoy se llevará a cabo en inglés. Si desea escuchar la interpretación al español en su computadora, haga clic en el icono del globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom y seleccione español o Spanish. Si se está uniendo a través de la aplicación Zoom en un dispositivo móvil, seleccione su idioma haciendo clic en More, Más o en los 3 puntos en la esquina inferior derecha de la pantalla. Seleccione donde dice Language Interpretation o interpretación del idioma, elija Spanish y haga clic en Done. Si desea escuchar solo a los intérpretes sin los ponentes originales, haga clic en Mute Original Audio cuando seleccione su idioma. Se pide que todos los que hablen inglés exclusivamente o incluso las personas bilingües que seleccionen un idioma para permitir una comunicación clara y puede cambiar de canal para escuchar en otro idioma en cualquier momento del programa. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I apologize at the beginning, I should have introduced myself. My name is Jim Oshar. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. And it is my honor to be able to introduce our moderator to everyone, and then she will in turn introduce our panelists. So I want to thank everyone for being a part of this panel, and Kristen Gibbons-Fedden for being our moderator. Kristen is a very accomplished litigator as well as a very strong advocate for survivors and has a very long career history of doing so as a leading litigator in the Me Too movement, working on numerous sexual abuse cases for survivors that were seeking civil justice. She has worked very strongly and closely in Montgomery County to help with survivors of sexual and physical abuse, domestic violence, and homicide cases. She is also recognized for providing a significant commentary on high-profile cases for many national news networks, and has also traveled nationally and internationally to speak out on fighting for changes in law and society, and also offering her insights for individuals attending those sessions. So we do appreciate her for moderating, as well as any of the legal expertise she may be able to provide as a part of the discussion this evening. So with that, I will turn things over to Kristen and then come back in later when we open up for question and answer. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Jim. And it is a pleasure to be here. We have four fabulous speakers to talk about these very important issues. Before I introduce our fabulous speakers and advocates, I'd just like to take a moment and recognize PCAR, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, the oldest anti-rape coalition in the United States, whose sole mission is to eradicate all forms of sexual violence. As part of this mission, they're sponsoring and leading this platform. As one of the key ways they serve this great mission is by advocating for the rights and needs of survivors of sexual abuse. And I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce our leader, planner, and motivator, Jim, who you just heard from. Jim, as he mentioned, he is the Chief Public Affairs Officer of PCAR, and he's served Pennsylvania residents since at least as early as 2004, after he obtained his master's degree in public administration and a bachelor in the administration of justice. Jim joined PCAR in November of 2019 and has been working for survivors of sexual abuse ever since, developing media and public policy strategies and building relationships amongst organizations with like missions. And we can't forget Adam Kulikowski, PCAR's communications director, Amanda Shaw, the multimedia specialist for PCAR and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and our interpreters, all of us who work so diligently to make this happen. And while I'd like to say we're gathered here in celebration of Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, sadly, we convene for another reason, because the former Secretary of State, Kathy Boockvar's failure to take the necessary step to ensure that the proposed amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution, which would have been a step closer to the enactment of a 2-year revival window, which would permit survivors of childhood sexual abuse to pursue civil claims that are otherwise time barred due to the previously restrictive statute of limitations. Throughout this panel, we'll have our panelists discuss the amendment, the steps that were taken to get to that point, the mishap, and the next steps. We'll also talk about the law. We also have 3 courageous survivors willing to share their stories, and we will also be answering questions at the end. Now, please be advised that these topics can be emotionally taxing. If you feel traumatized or emotionally taxed or triggered by anything discussed, please feel free to contact PCAR's Rape Crisis Center hotline at 1-800-692-7445. That's 1-800-692-7445. Or you can go directly to their website to find free confidential counseling. And don't forget, this is recorded. So if you need to step away, but you feel like you really want to catch what's being said, you can always catch it at a later time. Take the time that you need. So at this time, I want to take the opportunity to introduce our fabulous, fabulous panel. First, we have, and the panel also helped with the planning as well. So our panel is not only fabulous, as you will hear, but they also are why we are here today. First, we have Donna Greco. Donna has worked in the movement to end sexual and domestic violence for over 25 years. Her roots are in Connecticut, where she helped victims navigate the legal system as an advocate at a community-based rape crisis and domestic violence center. There, she developed a strong interest in effecting change at the policy level to remove barriers confronting survivors of all walks of life and helping to expand their choices and options. To further that goal, Donna earned her master's degree in social work with a concentration in policy and community organizing. Joining PCAR in 2003 and now as a policy director, Donna works in partnership with survivors, the Commonwealth's network of rape crisis centers, and policymakers to mobilize PCAR's mission in the Pennsylvania General Assembly and the United States Congress. Donna is absolutely amazing. I can't wait for you to hear her remarks. Second, we have another amazing woman, Erica Brozick. Erica is a licensed clinical social worker and the clinical director at Victim Services, Inc. in Cambria and Somerset counties. She's been with the agency since 2003 and is proud to be an advocate in the fight against sexual violence. She is a certified trauma treatment specialist and an EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing certified therapist and approved consultant. In 2020, Erica was selected as one of the 25 members of the Trauma Informed PA think tank out of Governor Wolf's Office of Advocacy and Reform, which developed a comprehensive plan to make Pennsylvania a trauma-informed state. Erica is also a survivor of sexual abuse by former pediatrician Johnny Bartow, and has channeled her own trauma into advocacy and passion for helping others find their way to healing. And yet, and still, we have yet another phenomenal person. We have Lakeisha Anthony. Lakeisha is a Philadelphia native and founder of VOICE, Voice, Victory Over Inconceivable Cowardly Experiences, Inc., a survivors network, an organization that aims to develop and encourage the voice of individuals while removing the stigma that often accompanies being a victim or survivor of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and any other inconceivably cowardly act. She is an education and training specialist at WAR, Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence. Lakeisha has devoted her professional life to educating and empowering people with a primary focus on women, especially Black women and girls, and young people who have been impacted by sexual violence to find their voice and reach their full potential. Lakeisha pursued her bachelor's from Kutztown University of Pennsylvania and completed an executive education program at Harvard University. Lakeisha has received multiple awards, with her most recent honored by the Philadelphia City Council for phenomenal work and leadership in the community. She was also awarded the 2018 KYW Game Changer Award, PCAR's Award, the PCAR Award, 2018 Black History Maker, 2017 Women Achievement Awards, Top 10 Rising Stars, and in 2016, the United States of Women nominated Changemaker by the White House. And last, but certainly not least, we have the fabulous Mike McDonald. Mike is in long-term recovery from the disease of addiction and maintains his mental health from the diagnoses of depression and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. As a survivor of childhood sex abuse at the hands of 2 Catholic clergy members dating back to 1981, Mike has been a survivor and advocate for statute of limitations reform in Pennsylvania since 2011. One of his abusers from 1981 received a state sentence in the summer of 2020 in another matter of abuse. And this was that survivor had heard Mike's story on a local news network, felt compelled to come forward, ultimately resulting in the jailing of this predator. Mike currently serves as a volunteer leader in Philadelphia for the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP. He is a married father of a teenage son, and Mike is a certified peer specialist in Pennsylvania and works with individuals faced with mental health and addiction challenges in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This month, Mike will be assuming a new role with SNAP as their communications manager. So now that I've introduced our fabulous, fabulous panel, I'd like to start off with Donna to just talk about a few remarks. Donna?
Thank you so much, Kristen. I'm really grateful to be a part of this town hall with everyone, and I'm grateful for people who've made time this evening to join us in this conversation. PCAR has worked together with survivors, rape crisis centers, and policymakers over the past 15 plus years to support statute of limitations reforms. And so many advocates have carried this water. We're thankful to every single person along the way, and we applaud everyone's efforts to keep pushing for this legislation despite many setbacks, including those mentioned by Kristen, that are really informing our current climate and circumstances and conversation today in Pennsylvania. We know this long-term advocacy takes a toll, and survivors have shouldered the burden of it while coping with the impacts of trauma in their lives. And we thank you. We thank all survivors, those here today with us, and those that are not here with us, as Jim mentioned, around the Commonwealth. You've been at the forefront of this movement, and we are grateful. You've been courageous and generous in coming to Harrisburg over this past decade plus to share your experiences and try to affect change for other people. And we thank you for that. As the legislative approaches and context have continued to evolve over these past 15 years, so have PCAR's positions and strategies. We have tried to remain nimble and responsive to what we've been hearing from survivors, from rape crisis centers, from partners and policymakers. Our Public Policy Committee advises us on those positions, and they have encouraged us to remain at the forefront of this movement and to continue to advocate for this, of course, as a top legislative priority for the coalition. In the past, PCAR strongly supported establishing the window statutorily. We remain supportive of that as an approach. And while we saw advancement in the House in past sessions, this approach faced opposition in the Senate on the grounds that it was not constitutional. We have, respectfully disagreed with that position, but we know that that is an ongoing position that people carry. We look forward to continuing those conversations in the Senate to see what has changed, and a lot has changed since the last statutory bill. We saw a new approach last session to address these constitutional concerns and to establish the window by amending the state constitution. And that process requires a bill to move and pass through 2 consecutive legislative sessions before going to voters. It would have gone to voters this May, as Kristen mentioned. However, the process was derailed by this lack of public education that was required after last session's progress on that bill. So this left our legislature, advocates, survivors talking about 3 possible pathways given all of this. And one was to continue with the traditional constitutional amendment and restart that clock with this legislative session. However, it would now have to pass the 2023 legislative session, which delays this window at least 2 more years for survivors that have already had to wait far too long. Then we saw momentum, and we were grateful to see support for an emergency constitutional amendment. And we learned through this process that emergency can be defined by the legislature. And in that dialogue, we talked about an emergency being created by this failure that occurred with the Department of State to educate the public. The agony and urgency that we were continuing to hear from survivors who, again, are coping with the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse while navigating their lives, while waiting for this legislation, while then facing yet another egregious pulling the rug out from under them. We felt strongly that could constitute an emergency, but ultimately we didn't see the support for that. I think there was a concern that it would not hold up in the courts. And so we did not see the emergency constitutional amendment successfully pass either chamber. The third approach is the statutory window and returning to that and committing to a dual path at this time. So the traditional constitutional amendment did advance in both chambers, and it now needs to be reintroduced in 2023. And now we're seeing a return to the statutory window to get this dual path underway to see if we can make this happen sooner than 2023. And we know survivors deserve that.
Thank you so much, Donna, and you're absolutely right. Survivors do deserve that. I want to take the time right now to turn it over to Lakeisha. But before I do, I just wanted to also follow up. The Spanish translation version will also be recorded. So I wanted to just make sure that was known to everyone. Lakeisha, I want to turn it over to you to speak on these topics.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for having me, and thank you, PCAR, and the rest of the panelists for ultimately creating this space for survivors' voices to be heard, as well as for us to gain more education and understanding about what's happening today. As Kristen mentioned, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, but I'm also a survivor of campus sexual assault as a teenager. I had the opportunity to advocate for statute of limitations reform and took place along with Michael and other survivors to stand and sit before the Senate to share our stories, to let them know about what we desire to see in a Commonwealth in reference to change. And ultimately, we've been fighting as a family together, uniting our voices to help people to understand what it's like, one, to be a survivor. I suffered in silence for 12 whole years prior to ever being able to speak publicly or even speak to my immediate family and friends in reference to the experience that I had. I stated that to let you all know that because we're working and we're fighting for a window, that it's necessary, because often survivors do not come forward right away. And I want people to recognize tonight that survivors can't wait any longer and shouldn't have to wait any longer for the access to justice, the access to do what they need. And justice looks different for every individual, but there should not be a pathway that's blocked in order for survivors to have justice. And ultimately, I work as an advocate, I work with WAR as an educator and with Voice, and all of us are fighting along with other individuals to ensure that there is a path to justice for survivors, and we're supporting them. And the other notion is that all survivors are impacted by this. We've seen a lot and we've heard a lot in reference to the Catholic Church and other entities and agencies that have interest in what's happening today. But ultimately, this does not just impact those who are survivors of clergy abuse, but this impacts survivors across the Commonwealth, no matter their race, no matter their creed, no matter who their predator was. And ultimately, we want to ensure that we're protecting future generations. That way, predators are no longer have access by being covered up. So I ultimately implore all of you to make sure that we continue to press this message that we need a window open, and we need it open now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakeisha, and I couldn't agree with you more. This window is a voice, but it's also a message to predators and institutions that enable these predators. Couldn't agree with you more. Erica, I'd like to turn it over to you to hear your remarks.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Donna and Lakeisha for sharing what you have so far. And I'm so happy to be here with everyone tonight. I am wanting to share a little bit with you first about something Lakeisha mentioned already, that survivors really struggle to come forward. And that's one of the key reasons why we need this legislation. I think there's a very big misunderstanding in our society that if someone hurts a child, that child is going to immediately reach out for help. And unfortunately, that's not what happens. When child sexual abuse occurs, that child does not often feel safe enough. Oftentimes abusers will threaten children, will force them into silence in many, many ways. And actually the average age that someone comes forward to report childhood sexual abuse is age 52. Age 52. Let that sink in for a minute. And over the years, we have placed restrictions, criminally and civilly, on what we can do for survivors. And that is so unfair. So as survivors have struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, with flashbacks, with nightmares, all of these things on a daily basis, suffering from anxiety, and really, on a personal, intimate level, with trust, with relationships, and everything that a survivor goes through, we have told them, we have silenced them once more by saying, you cannot use your voice, you cannot report this because, I'm sorry, your time has run out. And that has been so unfair. So I wanted to use a little bit of our case to demonstrate this for you. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by former pediatrician Johnny Bartow. And there are a few of us who speak about this experience. And, we unfortunately have so many in our community who were victimized by this man who was upheld as a very powerful and amazing pediatrician. So as you can see, we have a PowerPoint slide up on the screen now. And beginning in, first of all, Dr. Bartow's abuse spanned between 40 and 45 years of practice in Cambria County and Johnstown. And these are just some of the survivors that are networked here and that often speak together. And some of them may be in the audience tonight. We've opted to use initials because it really is their voice and their story to tell, so just out of respect. But beginning in 1985, survivor J was abused by Dr. Bartow. And she was around 9 years old at the time. At the time, the statute of limitations timed her out when she was 14 years old in 1989. In 1988, survivor B was abused by Bartow around age 11. In 1991, we had our first change in statute of limitations laws, and this is the criminal statute. And in 1994, when I was 12 years old, I was abused by Bartow. Another survivor, survivor E, was also abused that year, and she was 10 years old at the time. In 1995, survivor A was abused at age 10. And in 1998, Bartow was first accused of sexual abuse by several families in our community. In 1999, survivor B timed out at age 23. In 2002, actually, let me back up to say that in 1998, Bartow was never prosecuted. His power and the community surrounded him. And in 2000, he was issued his license to practice back. And at that point in time, and this is a very key piece of information, he continued to practice until 2017. 2017, that's 17 more years of abusing children. So in the meantime, 2002 and 2007 happened, and we had more changes to the statutes of limitations. 2017 came, and a very brave young woman came forward and disclosed abuse. And Bartow, fortunately, was charged this time and was convicted and is spending the rest of his life in prison. But many people think of the civil suits as a way for survivors maybe to financially recover. But there's another key piece to this that I think is really important. There was, I think it was Chrissy who mentioned it, there were systems in place during the years between 2000 and 2017 that allowed Bartow to continue to practice. There were complaints made about him constantly, about his behavior, and there were people who ignored those complaints. And the only way that we can hold institutions accountable, the only way that we can uncover what really happens in situations like this is through the civil justice process. So we need to have access to this so that we can truly find out what happens in cases like this, because we cannot allow this to continue. We have to protect our children. And how do we do that unless we figure out how it happened in the first place and eliminate that possibility from here on out? At our trial and at our sentencing in 2018, Survivor J and Survivor B were able to be there with us because some of us could press criminal charges because we have not timed out. But their voices were silenced again because they were not able to press criminal charges. They're not able to press civil charges. Neither are many of us. We were able to give impact statements that day, but they were denied that right. So they still have not had an opportunity to have their day in court. And that's yet another reason why this legislation is so important, to allow survivors to have their day in court against their abusers and voice for the first time, maybe in front of that person, to take their control back and to take their voice back after many years of being silenced. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Before I turn it over to Mike, I just wanted to make a correction. The hotline number is 1-888-772-7227. That's 1-888-772-7227. And if you didn't get it, that's okay, because it's also posted in the chat. Erica, thank you so much. In providing survivors with a voice, particularly when they've been silenced so long, silenced by the statute of limitations, institutions, what have you, is so important. And that's why this legislation is so important. Mike, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kristen, and I echo the words of Donna and Lakeisha. Childhood sex abuse, it doesn't discriminate. Doesn't, whether you are a Boy Scout, whether you are a member of a church, a community organization, a family, fraternity, it doesn't discriminate. I was abused at the age between the ages of 11 and 13 at the hands of two Catholic priests. And I want to share that because in 1981, when this happened, the pastor of that church did not want it to become a scandal. Therefore, the practice was they move a priest on to another parish. This individual priest was transferred to 7 more different parishes from 1981 up until 2003. To date, I've received close to 75 messages from all victims of his. They chose to continue to transfer this priest and cover it up, each and every transfer. Allow him to go on to be the serial predator that we found out that he was. At the age of 12, I was scared to tell anybody. I didn't know anything about statute of limitations. Ask a 12-year-old what a statute of limitation even is, and then ask that same 12-year-old when he or she will ever feel comfortable about a sexual experience they had with a Catholic priest. Not going to happen. We talk about the age of 52, the average age. I found my anesthetic, my drug of choice, at the age of 12. It numbed me into what I felt was my norm, a normal life. Up until the age of 35, after 2 marriages, 2 home foreclosures, multiple job losses, I had carte blanche, gold card membership into mental health and treatment facilities. I could walk in, they always had a bed. It's not a life. It's not a life, a fulfilling life, not a life to be lived. At age 35, I finally took my first shot at sobriety and things changed. That's when I learned to throw some of this up the hard way. I had to really unveil and strip away the shame, the guilt, the pain that I had been carried. For far too long, survivors have carried the liability, and we've had to fall back on. I've had to fall back many times on the state welfare system just to get myself through treatment, to get myself together. We've totaled that up, and I shared at the Judiciary Committee when I sat alongside my warrior sister, Lakeisha, over $168,000, the state of Pennsylvania funded my treatment. No institution, no individual was ever held responsible for that. That fell on taxpayer dollars. I was fortunate enough in 2018 to be able, this is post-grand jury report, to share my story with Associated Press and Reuters, who carried the story, and I named my abusers. I loved one of the lines from an attorney. He said, "You can't sue the truth." So I told the truth, what happened. 2 victims from one of my abusers came forward and stated that they had been abused last by him in 2002 and 2003, and they were still within the criminal statute of limitations. And in the summer of 2020, I stood in that courtroom right behind my abuser as the sheriff came up and put the cuffs on him to take him to state prison. Discovery allowed that to happen. As Erica said, discovery allowed that to happen. The discovery came when I was subpoenaed to one of the high-ranking officials in Philadelphia in his trial. They had uncovered a list of pedophiles, deemed pedophiles in that diocese. My name was listed as a possible victim. Had they come forth with that dated letter from 1981, 30-some years of my life could have been totally different. They failed to do it, and we cannot fail children today. We need to protect them, and we need to give survivors the opportunity with a statutory window to discover justice, to have the courtroom doors open to them so that each and every survivor can have their day in court and that healing process.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I just want to make sure before we open it up for questions, I wanted to let everybody know again, free and confidential help is available for all survivors, adult and children alike. To find your local sexual assault center, please call 1-888-772-7227 or visit www.pcar.org. That's PCAR.org. Pennsylvania's sexual assault centers serve all adults and children. They provide free and confidential crisis counseling 24 hours a day, services for survivors' family, friends, partners, or spouses, medical accompaniments, legal advocacy, and referrals to other services in your area, and prevention education. So for the first question, I want to take a moment and explain what a revival window is that would be opened for, what a revival window is. And then I'd like to turn it over to some of our survivors. Maybe Lakeisha, I can start with you to just explain what the impact would be. So a revival window, a term that you've heard utilized throughout this, is essentially if your claim, as Erica was talking about, if because of statute of limitations, there is a certain period of time by which you are able to bring forth a legal claim in the civil justice realm. If that time has expired, you can't bring it anymore. Doesn't matter if you have all of the evidence. A court can, under legal circumstances, say, hey, we got to throw this case out on a legal technicality because you waited too long. And Mike, I think you beautifully described waiting too long. Like, how do you tell a 12-year-old about a statute of limitations, as Erica pointed out? How would you tell that 14-year-old girl, hey, you got to sue Bardo before you turn 14? So that revival window would actually revive or make new those expired claims. And so any of those individuals that are on Erica's chart, for example, would be able to bring forth a lawsuit in the civil justice realm. And any defense attorney would be precluded or prohibited from bringing forth any defense to throw the case out, even though it's a meritorious claim, throw it out because it is time barred or not permitted because of the statute of limitations. The revival window would essentially be kicking out that statute of limitations. And the revival period as of right now would be applying to sexual assault survivors who were sexually assaulted as children. So if you are an adult, but you were sexually assaulted as a child, you would be eligible if the revival window was opened, which is the legislation that brings us here today and that we're pushing for. It would, hopefully in the future, we can work on a revival window for adults, because some of the delayed disclosure and a lot of the things that Erica was talking about before affect children as well as adults. So that's something that we are definitely looking to push for in the future. And I know Lakeisha, you and Mike too, were instrumental in at least moving that age of minors from under 18 to at least include college-aged individuals. But Lakeisha, can I turn it over to you and just maybe you could give us a brief answer on what a revival window would mean to either you, or I know you're very enmeshed in the survivor community, what others have said.
So ultimately, a retroactive window or revival window will give survivors access to be able to seek justice. And like I said before, justice is different for every survivor, but there are many survivors who would love to go and prosecute their predator and ultimately could not because of the statutes of limitations. And the only other option that might be available would be a civil suit. And ultimately, when we hear about civil suits, many people think that it's just about money, but it's not just about money. It's about dismantling systems. It's about uncovering the truth. It's about allowing someone's voice to be heard in a space that it's never been able to be heard before. It allows survivors to be able to share what happened to them and actually face their abuser and allow their abusers to actually face a day in court. And many survivors have been holding on and waiting for the opportunity to do this. We made progress in 2018 in Pennsylvania, and we applaud the progress that was made. But there was another step that needed to be taken. And we thought we were right on the path to do that until things happened. Now what we're doing is survivors are lying in wait. And not only are those survivors who have testified before the Senate and are advocates, but some other survivors across the Commonwealth who contact us daily, wanting to know, when can I take action? When can I go say something? When can I actually have my day in court with this individual? And we don't have any answers because we're still waiting.
Thank you for that, Lakeisha. At this time, I wanted to just bring Jim in for a second, just so that he can explain how everyone can submit questions. Jim, may I turn it to you?
Thank you, Chrissy. At the bottom of everyone's screen where you see a list of, well, not a list, but you'll see the different features to see chat, share screen, raise hand, as you may see in other Zooms. There is a feature that says Q&A that has two dialogue bubbles there. If you click on that, you have an opportunity to ask a question, and we will use those for our moderator, Kristen, to be able to ask our audience. So please feel free to just use that feature to ask questions. And it looks like we have our first one, Kristen.
Yeah, and I'd like to turn this over to Donna. Donna, our first question is, in the past, the Pennsylvania Senate has refused to vote or pass a legislative retroactive window. What chance is there of getting them to change this time around? Can you tell us, Donna, what a legislative retroactive window is and what the chance is that they're going to have the chance to change it this time around?
Thank you for that question. I think that is definitely a really important question. As we saw advancement today, last night and today in the House with House Bill 951, which is sponsored by Representatives Rozzi and Gregory, who too are survivors of clergy sexual abuse. We saw that bill that would establish this statutory window advance in the House, and now it is moving over to the Senate. So it's a timely question, and one that we're talking a lot about with our partners. I think it's really important to know that we've heard some commitment among the Senate this session to a dual path and the importance of, multiple paths to this window. We have heard that commitment from leadership in the Senate. We've also continued, though, to hear concerns about the constitutionality of a statutory window. So I think both are still important sentiments in the Senate, and it's important to reach out to our senators and ask to talk with them about this and to share our positions and to be good partners and to help advance this important legislation. I think when we saw the past statutory window get stalled in the Senate last time, that was many years ago, and a lot has changed. I don't think anyone could have anticipated this Department of State failure. I think that that is worth bringing into our conversations in the Senate to see if that can potentially change positions, given where we are today in Pennsylvania, given what we're hearing from survivors, given that more legal analyses have come out about the constitutionality of the statutory window, including PCAR's legal analysis from our legal team. I think there are some additional factors that are present now that potentially were not several years ago that are valid and valuable to this conversation. So we would really encourage you to reach out to your senators and have that conversation. And PCAR would be glad to share any resources that would help support that. And I also wanted to bring your attention to a rally on April 19th at the Capitol in Harrisburg, where there will be additional speakers. We're hearing potentially partners in the Senate will be attending that as well. And that's another important step to building support and helping to be good partners in that chamber to get this legislation done. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you so much for that question. You know, we're talking a lot about the failure of the Department of State. Donna, are you comfortable talking about what that failure was?
I can get us started. So to amend the state constitution, the bill has to pass 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and there are legal requirements that go along with that process to make sure that once those 2 bills have passed and it's time for voters to vote on the referendum on the ballot, that voters have been fully educated and informed about what they're actually voting on. So public education must happen, and there are steps along the way that must be met to make sure that that process is being followed legally. And unfortunately, the public education that was legally required after the progress that we saw last session, I believe it was House Bill 963, as it passed both chambers, that was also a Representative Gregory bill. At that time, public education was required by the Department of State, and somehow that did not happen, which then required us all to regroup and see what we could do next. I hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. And if anyone has any, question more about it, I'm also happy to tackle it as well. I thought you did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much, Donna. Erica, if I could turn it over to you, what were your sentiments like when you heard about Secretary of State Boockvar's failure, at least in the initial stages, and what you heard from others in the Survivor Network?
I think the biggest sentiment was just, yet another punch in the gut, maybe is a way to phrase it. It was just one more time of going backward. We feel like we go so far and get so close, and then here we go again. Yet another time we have to keep fighting. And quite honestly, we're tired of fighting. Survivors are tired of fighting constantly just to be heard. And I think everybody has a right to be heard. I think that should just be a natural right. And that has been taken away from so many people. So I think that's just the general outcry that I heard was just exhaustion, a sense of defeat, and where does this leave us now? So, it's good to know that there are multiple paths being explored. I think that there's more hope than there was, but a sense of confusion at this point. And truly, where do we go from here and what's going to happen next? We don't know. So the more support we can get, the more phone calls to legislators, the more support externally for the survivor community, it would be fantastic to have that.
Thank you, Erica. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Can I add to that?
Of course.
Also, just in reference to sentiments that survivors are having in reference to it, We also find that survivors are feeling like their voices aren't being heard, and that they are ultimately becoming a ping pong ball in the midst of this particular process, that they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but there is no resolution for what they necessarily want and need in the moment. And that can be devastating, as well as often defeating for individuals to continue to fight for something that they feel like that there's no hope to actually have access to. So I ultimately implore people to restore the hope for survivors, restore hope in the justice system, restore hope in the process that it takes. Survivors need for legislators to restore the hope.
Thank you so much for that, Lakeisha. I want to talk a little bit more about that ping pong, but I want to take a step back and just answer a question that has just come through. The question is will we ever see a retroactive window for Megan's Law? One of the abusers offended prior to the institution of that law and is not a registered offender. So for those who may be unaware, Megan's Law is the additional classification that an offender, a defendant who has been convicted of a sexual offense within the criminal justice system, a classification that that individual has to that classification that that individual gets. As part of that classification, which is mandated by law, that offender has to do certain things based on the classification. That person will have to register so that people in the neighborhood will know that there is a sex offender, a convicted sex offender within that area. And the classification could also require that particular individual to get certain counseling and treatment. For example, if you are deemed a sexually violent predator, which is the maximum part of that Megan's Law offense, or the SORNA obligations, that person will be required to undergo sex offender treatment at least one time per month. And so there are various classifications. In addition to that, there are punitive things that accompany failure to register. So if that individual doesn't register, they could be sent back to jail. The question here is, will there ever be a retroactive window? And by retroactive window, that means if Megan's Law was instituted at a certain date, but the offender was convicted prior to that date, do we think we will ever see any legislation such that Megan's Law will reach back and include that offender? I would have to say no. Our United States Constitution has in it a clause called the ex post facto clause. And it will be determinative, obviously, on how the courts deem Megan's Law. Some courts have found that it doesn't have a punitive element, but some courts have found that it does. And in accord with the US Constitution's ex post facto law, an individual cannot be held to penalty for things that that individual did prior to the enactment of that law. Like, it can't go back. This is why there also cannot be any revival window for like criminal statute of limitations that have also expired. So I would think that the ex post facto law would actually preclude a retroactive window for the Megan's Law offense, unfortunately. But I think one of the things that is really, really beneficial about having a network and being a part of a survivor community is so that you can still hold that person accountable in other ways. Perhaps, and it looks like this person may have been convicted. So at least you still have the conviction behind them. But there's other ways that we can hold people accountable. And I'm also happy to talk about that. But I wanted to revisit the ping pong that Lakeisha was talking about. And if I could, Mike, I'd love to turn it over to you. Lakeisha was talking about how survivors feel that they are being ping ponged around and pushed and pulled in various directions. And certainly Bukvar's failure doesn't help with that. I wanted to, in light of that, turn the question to you, Mike. What role can we all play? People in the survivor community, allies, people who run rape crisis centers, people who are out there to help. What role can we all play in supporting survivors and holding offenders accountable such that we can minimize that ping pong action?
It's a phenomenal question, and one that we have absolutely experienced since the snafu. I don't really like to term it that, but you know, by survivors sharing with other survivors is really the best means. There are things that I can talk with survivors about that I can't share with my dearest friends, simply because I know that Lakeisha and Erica and my other brother and sister survivors will absolutely understand me the minute I start talking. Experience, strength, and hope to be able to say we're still in this fight. If you can't fight, we're going to find one to carry your voice. We carry 1,000 voices each time we march up to Harrisburg. Continue that fight. And I share that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We have been down this road a few times. And I really want to echo what Donna said, and creating that good working partnership. One thing I have learned in advocating up in Harrisburg, state representatives and senators don't like a screaming person coming through their door saying, you know, so and so, and this is why you're blocking this bill, and you have a relationship with so and so. That's not going to fly. It's not going to fly. If in a calm manner, we're able to point out exactly the reason why we are here to listen to those survivor stories, as Lakeisha mentioned, and to keep that pressure on. Keep that pressure on. We hear that there are votes. The problem is, can we get that bill to the floor? Let's get that bill to the floor and see those votes. If we do it through the Senate, encourage those Senate members to encourage their leader, which is Senator Ward, to run that bill. That's where we have to go with this.
Thank you. Lakeisha, Erica, did you want to add anything to that?
I would just add that agencies and organizations to rally behind survivors and to help to amplify those voices of survivors during this time. I believe that change is created ultimately through stories. When we talk about stories and we hit the hearts of individuals, that's where we're able to actually create the change. Statistics say things, but they don't stick with people like stories. So I'd say to the survivors that are able, continue to share your stories, continue to let your legislators know about what you want, what you would like to see, and also continue to rally and actually connect and partner with the organizations that can help to amplify your voices as well. And let's continue to move a collective movement. Together we stand. Together we can. Together we can create change.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think to our sister senators who are out there tonight, please advocate with your senators. You know, we've built those relationships over the years, and this is the time to use them to really, as Lakeisha said, amplify the voices of our survivor community. Reach out to those senators. They want to hear from their constituents. They can hear so much from survivors elsewhere, but what really means something to them is a voice from their community. So if you can reach out to your senators and really make an impact and ask them to please, you know, talk to Senator Ward, get them to bring that bill to the floor, and then vote yes on the statutory window. That would be so wonderful for the survivor community.
Thank you so much, Erica. And thank you as well, Donna, Mike, and Lakeisha. Thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us. Donna, your knowledge, awareness, and keeping us informed about all of the legislative efforts that PCAR is taking. At this time, we want to be totally respectful of your time. I want to turn it over to Jim to kind of close us out, and just make sure you guys know that this is just the beginning of this conversation, of an ongoing conversation after what BUCVAR did. And I want to turn it over to Jim just in case there's any questions that arise. Our ears are still open and we're so prepared to answer any questions anyone has. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen, for doing a phenomenal job moderating this. And thank you to all of our panelists for being brave and sharing your story and just really helping everyone in our audience understand what's at stake and how we all have a role to play, and we can all still work together to make a difference for so many survivors that aren't able to join us tonight, and we can still make a difference for them. As you'll see on your screens right now, if you have any questions that weren't able to be asked, or if you think of a question later, feel free to contact Donna or myself, and we are glad to follow up with everyone. If you are in need of any local services, or you have someone that's close to you, you would like to refer them to any of the sexual assault centers throughout Pennsylvania, we have the 800 number posted on here also. Feel free to write that down and share that with anyone so that they can also reach the help that they might need. We have more information about this and many other issues that we are advocating for on behalf of survivors and their loved ones. That is all on our website at pcar.org. And we thank you one more time for your time this evening, for your support of survivors, and for your own personal advocacy. We will have this information available as it was recorded. We thank you for your time. Enjoy your evenings, and we look forward to continuing working with you. Thank you, everyone.